So hi everyone, my name is Virginia Arce. I'm the Exhibitions Program Coordinator at the Irvine Fine Arts Center. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're not all zoomed out because we have two amazing artists to talk to and hear from today. I've had the privilege of working with Alexandria Wallace. Alexandria, would you like me to call you Alexandria or Allie? Do you have a preference?
My mom's here, so call me Alexandria. That's the name
Okay.
she gave me. She'll be happy.
All right. And Amanda Marcia Lantunes, whose works are on view in the exhibition titled Soft Architectures, which is up at the Irvine Fine Arts Center. Our galleries remain closed due to COVID. We are crossing our fingers that we get to have some reservations opening soon. But in the meantime, you can view them online. And if you're following us on social media, we'll be sharing installation images, close-ups of the works that are included. So you can follow us there. And then of course, if we have any updates at all on our ability to open the galleries and take reservations, it'll also be posted on our social media. So I'm not gonna take up too much time in my introduction, so we can turn this over to Alexandria and Amanda. But I want to just give a very, very brief introduction to them both. Amanda Marcia Lantunes is an LA-based multidisciplinary artist who works in painting, costuming, performance, writing, and installation art. She was born and raised in the countryside of the state of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Antunes was born in Sorocaba. Amanda, did I say that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty good.
And she grew up in Salto de Pirapora, Sao Paulo. After living in Sao Paulo in the early 2000s, she relocated to the East Coast of the US, where she launched a career in costume design and founded an arts and culture magazine called Spirited. Alexandria Wallace was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. She attended the University of Texas, where she received her Bachelor's of Fine Art in painting. After a few years in Houston, teaching and maintaining a studio practice, she relocated to Los Angeles, where she completed her Master of Fine Arts at the Otis College of Art and Design, which also happens to be my alma mater, but I'm not biased. Lord is a great program. She graduated in May of 2020. What a time. We'll hear maybe something about that during her talk. Her studio is located in Los Angeles. So welcome to everyone who is still dropping in. Gonna just admit some more folks into the room. And so the way that this talk is gonna go, we're gonna turn over to Alexandria and then to Amanda. And then we'll try to set aside some time for questions and comments. We have a good showing today. I'm really excited to hear you both talk. So I'm gonna share just kind of a quick slideshow so we can see, because the exhibition is still unfortunately closed to the public. So I'm just gonna do kind of a slideshow and then, yeah, I'll let Allie take it away. Sorry, I should be a pro at Zoom by now. Okay. And also, if I could just ask everyone who's here, if you could keep your microphones off, and then once we get to the Q&A section, you're welcome to unmute yourself and just jump in and ask any questions, or you can also use the chat function. All right. So, Allie, can you see this slideshow?
Yeah.
Awesome, great. All right. So here's the installation view. If you were in the Fine Arts Center, this is what you would be welcomed with. Beautiful. Not taking any credit. Okay. Take it away, Allie. Alexandria.
All right. Awesome. Either. It's great. I don't care. I truly don't. I probably should decide if I do, but all right. I'm Alexandria. Thank you everyone for being here. I see so many like familiar names, so I'm really excited to see everybody. So the first space that you would walk into in the Fine Arts Center has this diptych as a part of it, which is 2 pieces made of canvas, spray paint, vellum, and then the wood support up at the top is, I think, what did I end up buying? I don't know, red oak or something, I had to phone my dad and say, what can I drill through? So variety of materials here, mostly things that would traditionally go into just like stretched canvas paintings, but deconstructing the armature of that a little bit and allowing it to come down onto the floor. So if you were in the space, you would really feel the scale of these things. So I want to note that first, that the piece on the left is about 14 feet total in length. So that red stripe that kind of comes all the way down towards the front would really be quite confrontational. So something to think about, just like your body standing in front of these pieces, they would be really quite large, and they face each other, which is exciting because they're sort of in conversation. So a little bit about where these came from. So these are two sets of images. One set were all taken outside. So the exterior piece is all made of outside images. So light falling onto walls and the ground and things like that, that I've been photographing throughout quarantine. Given my daily walks are become like such a rhythm, and maybe one of the only things that I feel like I can do besides being in my studio. And so I started to accumulate a lot of photographs, and I wanted to find a way to basically take all of those and compress them together. So that's what's happening here. And then the interior piece, which is on the right, is the same idea, but photos that were taken in my apartment as opposed to out on walks. So really both of these stemmed from just extreme observation of my space around me that I've been not leaving often, as I'm sure many of you understand.
And we're looking at some details of each piece.
Yeah, so I'll explain really quick what's happening here. The lighter material that you're seeing is vellum. So more traditionally kind of like an architecture or drafting material. And it was important to me to use that because I do think of these as structures in a way. And so using a material that already has that kind of imbued in it was something that I did intentionally. And then behind what you're seeing is some layers of ink and spray paint. So I actually was using stencils. So I would take those photographs just on my iPhone really casually, just while walking or spending time inside. And then I would print them really large and then cut through them and create stencils. So the image itself goes through like several versions of transformation until it actually gets spray painted or used as a reference, excuse me, to make these like little traced out shapes that you see. So that's a bit about the process and then the sources there. And Virginia, just let me know if I should be sharing like more or less. Everyone here who knows me knows I can talk forever, so just cut me off. Okay, so this piece is a really good example of something that I'm interested in doing, which is creating these impossible locations. And so I do this through taking two locations that are in very different places and times, and I'll put them together on one surface. So this piece was created from one image that I took of a wall in Culver City, and then a second image that was from like 2012 it was taken of a landscape like the hill that goes down to the spiral jetty, which is an earthwork that some of you may be familiar with. And so I was thinking for whatever reason on this day about those two places and these two images. And so I wanted to create basically this like impossible third place where those things collided and to see what would happen. So as you can see, the result is quite abstracted, which I think happens often when you're A, working with something that doesn't actually exist, and B, working with your memory, because it can be obscured so quickly. And even though I have those photos, I'm trying to bring in, other, when it comes to like, and I'll think about like the temperature in those places. And I try to bring in kind of all of my senses when I'm making one of these works to guide what I'm doing beyond just the photographic. So they start much more concrete and then they become like more abstracted as I'm working on them. Yeah, so that's that one.
Sorry.
Cool. No, you're good.
So can we talk a little bit about what we're seeing here? Because I think that this is a really fascinating, I mean, one, it's just a beautiful picture of the installation, but also there's a big portion of the image that we're looking here, at here, where it's kind of a convergence of COVID, but then adaptation. And so maybe you could talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so the works that you see that are installed in the gray kind of painted band is a series titled Pace. And all of those stem from photographs that I've taken while taking walks. Again, lots of walking. And I started making those actually before COVID, but then they sort of became the one thing that I could keep making after the fact, which was ironic because they were intended to be for my thesis show at Otis, which ended up being a tiny version in a maquette because at that point it was April of 2020 and we really, had no way to have an exhibition in person. And so I had made a tiny version of this and it's really exciting to see it installed here and for those things to actually get to, be in the space as I intended. And then, like I was saying, those works, there are 5 that you see here, but I've got a series of, I think about 18 now. And I've just kept making them because they're small and they can be made in my apartment. And they kind of like became my little COVID buddies because they were like little and they were something that I could make in my space and could sort of sustain this way of like looking at the world and investigating the images that I've been taking during this time. So Virginia, I'm not sure if that's what you were alluding to, but that's kind of like the backstory.
Well, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about what that gray framing device does. And I'm asking because I've been asked by the few staff who have been able to see the exhibition in person. They're like, oh, that was a really clever decision, was to have the band. And so, but it's not just an aesthetic decision, right? It's also a conceptual.
Yeah, so the band itself is representative of a cast shadow. So if you look at the edges of this gray shape, they're actually not straight, which is something that, upon initial impact, you might not notice. But when you are standing there for a little bit of time, then you realize it actually has like a wobbly edge on both the top and the bottom. And that edge mimics itself as it goes, from left to right. So it's basically the same on the top and the bottom to mimic the way that light falls onto something and then leaves like this kind of skinny banded cast shadow that runs all along the edge of, whatever object that is making it. And so I wanted to use that, as a reference for light, and also just the color gray is so sort of like ready for projection, and these drawings and the works on paper like have so much kind of air in them that it's nice to have this container as well that is a little bit more of like a framework both formally and conceptually for what these pieces are about. So yeah.
So here we're looking at one of them.
Yeah, so most of them are made of, similar set of materials. I'm almost always using some combination of like collage, sumi ink, charcoal, Sometimes acrylics, like that blue shape that's up at the top is actually a shape that I've painted with acrylic on a different piece of paper and then cut and collaged on. So what's fun about these is they are sort of like flexible, and because there's not a whole lot going into them, I have like fewer elements to deal with, which actually gives me more freedom while I'm making them. Like within restriction, I actually feel like looser to make decisions, which is really nice. So I've tried to keep them like kind of consistent when it comes to material and size. They're all the exact same paper. Shout out to Hiromi Paper in Culver City. They keep helping me find this giant paper even through COVID. So it's, for a while it was stuck in a port, and we finally got some, which is just, you know, the things we do these days to track down art supplies. So yeah, here's a second, trying to see if there's any different materials in this one. Not really. I guess the charcoal kind of plays a bigger role here with that like kind of fuzzy background shape. And again, all of these stem from photographs. So like a little moment of realism, these like sets of horizontal lines that are quite small and kind of in blocks towards the middle, those are some windows. And then on the left, there's those like branches coming out, which were some trees. So this sometimes I'll dip a toe in something that's like a little bit more referential combined with something that's more abstracted, which I think stems from the way that they're made, like using a photograph, also using my memory and that blurry gap in between. Virginia, if you want to go to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this is where I feel like as they've progressed, the spray paint has become more of a player. So this big green area that you see that is made from spray paint. And I definitely think that the first two pieces that you all saw, the diptych interior, exterior, some of that stenciling process, I think was born out of these works on paper. So they're also like a space for me to have a low pressure environment to document things and to like learn how the materials are working on a smaller, more approachable surface, like I was saying, with fewer elements to deal with. So that's kind of and how I've just continued to make them because I know sort of what they are, and they just continue to like teach me little things that then I can use in the larger scale work, which has been really helpful. And like I've said before, they are just, they kind of brush up against photography, which I know, Virginia, that was something we had talked about. And the way that that's a spoiler, we'll get to that later, but yeah, so that's a series that I'll continue to work on. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you, because I think it's a beautifully written description of your work, but I'm curious if you could unpack it a little bit more. What do you mean when you say that you're interested in making paintings that brush up against photography?
So, I mean, first, I think it's important to note that like earlier in my art practice, I did think of myself as more of a photographer. I always enjoyed painting, but my photos were just better. So that was the work that I was like more willing to share. And all of my paintings just sort of went to live in like my parents' house, and my photography were the things that I was like more interested in showing and felt more confident in. And so it's interesting because over time, I don't know, I guess I felt like painting was something that I was like outside of, or I couldn't quite hack it. And I don't know why I thought I had to do that, but for whatever reason I did, just like being early out of school. And then at point 4 years out of undergrad, where I realized that painting could be my like access point to photography, if that makes sense. And so kind currently what that looks like is like taking the photographic source as like a starting point. And then, for example, in the interior, exterior diptych, all those photos were just like casual snapshots, and then they were enlarged, like I was saying, and then there were the stencils. So the forms are like, even though the final medium is paint, it's not so far removed from photography. And in fact, I very much rely on that to get to where I'm going. So yeah, it just continues to kind of inch like, closer to it, I think. And I used to sort of avoid that because I felt like, to be a painter, I have to really have like 2 feet in on this medium. And I mean, I don't know where that came from. Like, maybe I've probably some narrative I've told myself about what it looks like to be an artist, but I guess I've just kind of given in. I'm letting them like creep closer and closer together. And this is what's happening. So we'll see where it goes.
Hey, well, another question that I had was about Los Angeles as a site, and you write about it in your artist statement. How do you ever think about the history of Los Angeles as a place where its history is kind of loaded with erasure and rebuilding, forgetting? It's kind of a city that the common conception of it is that it's always kind of reinventing itself. Does that play a role in your work at all when you are thinking about things like trying to capture a moment, essentially?
Yeah. I mean, it does in a way. LA is still like somewhat new to me. I moved here in 2018, for grad school, and it is a place that has so many layers, and unfortunately, some of those layers get demolished before I even get to experience them. But I am kind of like you were mentioning, I'm quite interested in like freezing, or as I've dramatically said before, memorializing these like little moments around the city, because it is a place that changes so quickly. Like the speed at which walls get painted and buildings get bulldozed, and the movement of like cars and people wears on this city is unlike any other place that I've lived. And it's really interesting to watch. Like a recent example is like one day I drove by LACMA and its whole right side is just gone. And of course, like I knew that that was the plan, and I'd, seen the renderings, and this has been something that the museum has been talking about for years. But then for one day to just drive down Wilshire, and a place that you've spent so many hours just to like vanish, is a kind of a surreal thing. And that happens in both like large and small ways around the city every day. And so like I fully believe in, being really kind of a slow observer of everything around you. And so I'm like acutely aware when something changes. And yeah, some of it's like exciting and some of it's heartbreaking. So I guess, yeah, it's interesting making work that is looking at that specifically. And yeah, I guess we'll see how the $750 million spaceship turns out per LACMA. But so yeah, it's totally part of it. And I'm just learning, more about the city the longer I'm here, and trying to capture little bits before they're covered up.
Well, thank you. On the subject of memorializing,
Yeah.
I feel like that's a really fitting theme to pivot into Amanda's work. We're looking at speaking in tongues, which is, Amanda, I saw this in your studio a couple of months ago. Time's a little bit tricky these days, but not too long ago. So can you talk about this work and where it originates from, what inspires it?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Ali. You're awesome. Your work is beautiful. I'm very, happy to share space with Ali's work as well. So just wanted to say that. This work, Speaking in Tongues, is referential to my childhood. I grew up in a household with a grandmother who raised me, and you uttered words that were unknown to the speaker, unknown to me, and that's called a speaking in tongues practice. She used to tell me as a kid that I would know when I spoke in tongues. I would know when it came because it would have to come natural to me. This particular work was made after a trip to Brazil when a family member suddenly passed away, and we had a ceremony, a ritual around her death. And the ceremonies that take place where I grew up is surrounded by speaking in tongues practitioners. The walls of the house where I was, or where I grew up, also were peeling off and were falling apart as the ceremony happened. When I came back to LA, I found a roll of leather fabric on a dumpster outside my studio, which is what you see. The beige material is the roll that I found, and I brought it into my studio. And the next few months, I started to paint on the surface, but the paint didn't feel right. I wasn't happy with the texture of the leather. It feels like vinyl leather, but it's not quite. It's also wallpaper material. It's also from the 70s. So the material is pretty, it was already in decay in some ways. And I just kind of helped the fiber. And as I cut, I noticed that the fibers were very much like they were still solid, but they would rip to an extent where I could draw with a knife. They were very malleable in that way. So I was drawing with a knife directly onto the surface. And these drawings became the second layer onto the painting. And then as I finished the 2 layers, I would go back to it and rip small cuts from the inside. It was a performative set of work. I did it alone in my studio as a way to even cope with what had happened as an experience in Brazil. And I wanted to look at those walls again and feel those walls as something to look at and feel safe in it. So these surfaces are very soft. Every fold can fold back in. So when you hang them, actually when they peel off. But if they're laying on the ground, they're like peels that can be taken back in. So it closes the surface entirely, so you don't see the painting anymore. I like that kind of mimicking the idea of covering it up, obfuscating the painting, at the same time ripping through the painting in order to see something else. Yeah. And I'm still working on the series as well. So this was actually the first one that I did when I got it back. And the text, the end result is not necessarily something I thought through. This is a performative practice for me, this work. So it comes with being in the space and being with the material and finding fulfillment for this material. And in the process of repetition and rhythm and movement is how I got this work. I came to be with this work. Yeah.
Amanda, one of the things that, one of the things that I think, well, one of the ways that I came to know of your work is through your performances and that really kind of performative element of your practice. So I was excited, but I was also, when we decided that we were going to work together on this exhibition, I went, oh, but there's no kind of in-person performative, you're showing your visual work. Is that a challenge? Can you talk a little bit about what that's what that's like for you to negotiate just that someone's going to be introduced to your work just on a visual level?
Yeah. Well, I make work, physical work all the time in my studio. It's not, but I have only showed performance and up until this point. So this is new for me as a place to share, but I have part of the performance practice is to create also use material to create form. So I'm not a linear thinker, so you can probably tell by the way I'm speaking, but I feel like in essence, my work is a ritual, and the ritual takes place during a ceremony, and the ceremony is a human condition. We all practice ceremonials. We all have rituals in some ways, and we're closely bound as people with this idea of rhythm and repetition and movement. So for me, the actual material guides me through a process of ceremony. So the objects that I create in the studio are just results of that. The objects I create, out in nature when I'm working in nature are the results of that. And the body of work that I collect eventually that becomes whatever you call a series is often until the material that I find in the space is finished. So I run through the material until it expires, and then I find something else. So this leather piece, eventually I'll run out of it, and then this work will end. I still have quite a bit because I think it was a factory that dumped so much outside my studio, and I benefited from this trash, really. So for me, material is something that's to play with. I find it on my way. I'm gifted materials. I'm often in transition between places. So where I'm at, I will work with the materials that I find there. I don't bring materials with me in order to create something else with the boundaries that are providing me or like the boundaries that I'm guided with.
I'm going to follow up with another question about ritual, but let's get on to another body of work that you have. And here's an installation view of two of these pieces side by side. This piece is just stunning. I think I say wow every single time I look at it. Can you talk a little bit about this work? This has kind of a companion piece, which is a little bit difficult to explain to someone who's not in this space, but there's a sound work that accompanies this.
Yeah, this is done with mylar. So it's a light box essentially. It's a light box made of mylar and concrete. Initially, I made this piece in 2018, and the layers of mylar were projected photographic portraits of my family in Brazil. And I only painted, it's very abstracted, but because I only painted the darkest shadows of each photograph. So the darkest point of the image projected made it into this piece, and I layer them all into this one box. The concrete box also was made with the help of a really good friend and someone who documents my performance practice quite often, Eric Graham. He's an engineer, and he helped me figure it out what to do to make this out of concrete. I wanted this to sit so heavy and to feel heavy, like on the ground, or ideally, initially, I want it to be on the wall, but it's quite impossible to hang something like this on the wall unless it sits on a pedestal, which was, there was a pedestal made for it, made out of iron. But for this show, this piece has never been really shown before. It's lived in my studio since its fabrication. And I've altered the painting inside quite a few times because there are slides. I can change the slides however I like. Right now there's 7 slides of mylar. And between the slides, I also added thread and text for this new iteration, a section of a poem. And in the poem, I start the poem with the words "die first." Die first can be interpreted in various ways. But to me, it meant the idea of renewal, the idea of regeneration, the idea of every time there's a death, there's also space for rebirth. I do think I go through life and have many deaths and many rebirths. I hope I continue to have many deaths and many rebirths. Like there's a cyclical, the cyclical responsibility that I feel like I have with this work that keeps on kind of evolving. The box stays the same. For this, we put on the ground, because actually when you visited my studio, Regina, is when we decided to leave it on the ground. I don't know if you remember that, but because my studio floor is concrete, and the box on the I had to work with the box on the floor because I just can't lift it on my own, and it just it's pretty heavy. It's 200 pounds, but like it bleeds into the concrete of the gallery as well. It's almost like it's coming out of the floor. Some people have looked at the image of this and asked me if they say it looks tragic. Actually, I don't see it as being tragic. You may look at it and see like maybe it's the head of a cemetery tombstone, maybe. I don't see it as that. I feel like there's a light you're looking into the whole time you're in the gallery, and that light, actually, if you shoot that light with your phone, a video of it, the light is blinking, and there's a movement to this light that I enjoyed, like watching, being in a dark, especially in a dark space that the gallery provides outside of my studio. But I hope I don't know, it has a place to live somewhere, because
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. It definitely
Thank
feels like a beacon of some kind, which is why
Yeah.
we kind of decided on that placement on the floor.
Yeah.
Let's see, moving on to these works, which now we can kind of like fold into the conversation. Maybe we can come back to the element of ritual and memory and how you're well, I'll let you talk about these.
Oh, you're doing fine. So this is a series that's continuous. It's ongoing, indefinite time. As long as I use social media, I'll be making this work. This is a way that I found to rescue my photos from Instagram. I was using Instagram for about a year, and I was feeling this sort of this detachment, as all of us do, from the physical experience of looking at imagery on paper or printed or in a photo album, as I had when growing up, and taking notes onto each image. I remember my mother, she keeps photo albums for everything, and she would print them and like write everything down, like almost diary format, for this moment in time. So my first batch, I printed 100 photos of 5x5 from Instagram, and I use the phone for all of it. I use an application that prints photos directly from my Instagram and ships to your house, and they're pretty great. And the photos are matted and high quality, actually, as a small format print. And I print them in really thick material, really thick paper, so I can cut and collage them together and also stitch them. So the process is I'm printing these imageries from my travels here and elsewhere and in Brazil, and I'm combining these memories by stitching them together and recreating a new memory from these places in between. Some of these images that you see here are also spaces of performance that I combine with my space from my household in Brazil, from home. Like this image right now is the wall of where I grew up, stitched onto a World War II shelter where a performance took place. And in the back of each collage, I write down the combination of these times. So it's a time vortex, merging. It's also, for me, a way to remember. Remembering is something my family has always been, you know, on me. My family is highly influential in my work because they were storytellers. They were very simple in the ways that they lived their lives, but they told very elaborate stories, very surreal stories, and they expressed themselves in those stories because we believe that without stories, we cannot remember. And if we cannot remember, we won't understand. And so these photographs in some ways they're pressed on glass because I do see them as like these memories. And I call them memories dissolutions because our memories are not always linear, and our memories are definitely not always true. We make up memories all the time. And as time goes by, our memories dissolve into something else. And it's like that game of, you know, the telephone, and like when something gets spread for so long, like it changes the meaning of it entirely. So that's what this work is really about. It's in some way my own escape from the internet and to get grounded into this imagery. So yeah, this is my grandparents' kitchen, and then that's the LA River juxtaposed with their kitchen. And yeah, sorry, did I interrupt you?
No,
Yeah.
I just, sorry, do you want to talk about what these images are that you've?
Yeah, so that is a photograph of where my grandfather was buried. It's a cemetery in my hometown. And the opposite image is driving through the desert in the Coachella Valley with the windmills. And I placed them upside down. There's almost two worlds collapsing. They're about to collapse, actually. And that's, I call Everyone Alive Wants Answers 2020. I mean, it was made during a time that I think we're all wanted answers from the times we're living, also from the lies being told, from the lack of language and nuance. And these imagery, they're like little poems for me to survive, to like kind of give myself some kind of an answer about the collapsing of two polar opposite worlds that I live in.
And
Yeah,
also,
that's
I'm really,
mhm.
another thing that I love about your work is your use of language, both in the fact that poetry is a big facet of your practice, but a lot of the titles of your work also reference Portuguese. And just, can you talk a little bit about that, how
Mhm.
bilingualism plays into your work and
Mhm.
what you kind of want to signify with it?
Yeah, actually, I kind of think of my work as translation. In some ways, I'm always translating. I'm always translating in my head. I'm always translating in my body. Um, because translation is one of those things that's directly concerned with secondness, the idea of secondness, the idea that, you know, the original came first and then you translate it. The idea of men versus women, non-white and white, emotion and reason. We're always placing things and then following up by a second act. I'm very curious about the idea that language is something uh, we respond to so violently, but also we can save lives by speaking. Like it's a powerful tool, but we misuse it constantly. We misuse it on a daily basis. To me, translating this work also, this particular work feels like a translation because I'm taking the original photograph and I'm recreating what I'm seeing by giving a new word for it, or a new voice, or a new imagery. In some ways, language, as well as my own bilingual life, has influenced that, definitely, but also my upbringing influenced that. My grandmother, who raised me, was illiterate. She couldn't read and write. So in the way that she communicated was by interpretation of things, and a lot of her interpretation was actually sometimes better than the original. And I remember telling her, like, I consider my grandmother wiser than most people I know who have PhDs. And I've met, and I felt like she had a word or a sense of using language that was her own. She wasn't taught by others how to say something, or how to perceive the world through the eyes of the other. So that guided me also in the process of learning a new language like English, and also in the process of accepting my own, original language, that is Portuguese.
Amazing. So we're gonna, since we're running a little bit, I want to leave time for any questions that anyone might have. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the exhibition, why both of your work, I thought, was in conversation with each other, even though you didn't know of each other before I asked you if you would be willing to participate. And these are just kind of like some visual examples of these kinds of ideas or aesthetics that were already operating in both of your practices. The title of the exhibition is actually inspired by the science, the neurobiology of how we make memories, and how studies have shown that every time that we access a memory, we're essentially recreating it. So much of your work, both of you, had to do with either returning or preserving something, whether it's a memory, it's a ritual, it's something that is formative and defines who you are at that moment in time. And so the title Soft Architectures was kind of a play on how that is a very malleable way to essentially the architecture of oneself. Do either of you, has your thinking about your work changed since being put in conversation with each other in this exhibition?
Well, I feel like, I'll go first, Amanda, to give you a little break.
You go.
So, I first of all, listening to Amanda talk makes me just realize more and more like how in conversation our work truly is, which is just a testament to your selection ability, Virginia, to like put us together. And I do think it impacted me a bit. Most of this work was made, well, the larger pieces at least were made like once I knew this show was happening and I was getting familiar with Amanda's work. And so I think it definitely was like a bit of a compass, just knowing that the idea of memory would be like a thread between our two practices. And the title is like so fitting because our memories are such flawed documents, just the way that they're sort of like written and rewritten as we look at photos, of another time and place. There's just so many gaps in those things, and I think we sort of convince ourselves, or at least I do, that like I do remember something really well that was 20 years ago, and that simply is not true. Like I've actually just been shown a lot of photos, or like Amanda was mentioning, told many stories. And so what I'm remembering is like not actually my memory at all. It's like a construction that's been made by all of those pieces like coming together. And it's incredibly flawed and probably far from the facts of that actual like time and place.
Yeah, I remember walking into the space and seeing the glass frame of the little photograph. When you look from a certain angle, I can see Ali's work through the frame, and her lines and her light and the idea of shadow and light playing against the glass made me so happy. It was like we were in full conversion and conversation in the space, without before having this kind of conversion before. I also the Mylar pieces, when I first saw Ali's work, I thought about the process of making that and her process of creating the idea of shadow. The shadow play that she has in her work is very much like something I look at all the time, as in the darkest points of light between light and shadow, or the brightest points between light and shadow. And I think her translation of it, which I'm calling a translation of it, it's so it's so beautiful and ethereal. And I feel like looking at her work, and I hope it opens eventually to the public, because there is an in-person experience by looking at the piece draping, and it's bigger than you, and it embodies like the space in some ways. And yeah, I learned so much from being in the space with your work, and also learned so much to look at my work in other ways, in ways that I hadn't seen before, like the glass versus the back, like, or the conversion of the cuts in your stripes and your light. Yeah, it's been really, really cool to see.
So right now we're looking at a view of the gallery. This isn't the entire show, so don't think that you don't need to come see the show when it's finally open to the public. This is just, but I think that there's really kind of a symbiosis amongst you that it just kind of felt really natural. We have about 8 minutes left, so if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourself at this point and kind of just jump in. Otherwise, we could go into the weeds with theory and talking about process. Another thing that I think is really interesting about both of your work is that you both are really arriving at abstraction as a way to talk about some really complicated and personal things. Ali, I know that in the kind of development of your work, you started from a medium that is really associated with referencing reality and objectivity, and now you've gone into a direction that is really completely abstract, but still has ties to an actual lived experience or an event. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for me, photography, like going back to a bit of what I was sharing about photo being my chosen medium more so early on in my practice, my like frustration with photography is basically what brought me to abstraction, in that it just felt so like sealed. Like, you make the image and this is the image and it is what it is, and that's it. And over time, even though like I was better at doing that than making paintings, I was so dissatisfied with them as documents, and I kept finding myself like making things in Photoshop where I was like compressing tons of images together, and I got to a point where I realized like actually it would be okay if I brought in some other materials to this process, and if the photos became much more secondary and I let some of those blurrier topics like memory and history and environment like work their way in. And so I think once I let go of the photographic and started employing all of those other things that kind of sit in proximity to making a photograph, the work became quite abstract. And like I said, there's still some like little tangible moments of representation within it, but yeah, I think it's difficult to talk about all of these subjects with realism. I mean, I was thinking about this when Amanda was sharing her memory series with the Instagram photos. It's like, even though she is, I think, closer to photography, obviously with those works, like there's still this like layering and cropping and like forcing of information together, which is, you know, another form of abstraction. So I think it just works really well as like a lens to communicate about these ideas that are just so malleable to begin with.
Yeah, Amanda, looking at the dissolution series, memory dissolution series, for example, I feel like the way that you use surrealism in your work actually kind of makes the present even feel more pronounced. Do you think of your work in a kind of a surrealist vein? I personally am familiar with a lot of the artists and the writers that have inspired you, but someone who is just joining us for the first time might not be.
Mm-hmm. I'm flattered you think of my work in that way. It's like, I think like fantastical surrealism. I'm very much influenced by surrealist writers and storytellers, definitely. Surrealist makers that I've had along my way, but at the same time, the fact that I think also our sense of perception and memory is often surreal. So I like the way you're saying, like maybe they become more real because the reality of it is that it is kind of surreal. Mm-hmm. And especially now these days, I think it has been boosted up with surrealism and I hope that I can't wait to see all the work of the surrealists of our times. Honestly, like what happens to the times is so important, and what influences that time and influences our practice is so important. Doesn't always mean that I'm responding to the times. It's a bit more timeless in that way. It's like past and present. For me, like the abstraction, like what Ali was saying, like it is hard to speak of reality without abstraction, without illusion. I think it's much hard. It's hard. But I used to be a figurative painter. I grew up painting portraits. I grew up painting landscapes. That's how my practice kind of began as a child and a teenager, learning. And I faded away from that eventually because it was something like learning a new language. You start mimicking and you start omitting, like uttering these words and these imageries that you see, and you just kind of put them out there in your own way. But eventually you hope that you get to learn that language so well that you can create your own. And that's, I think, in some ways how my process started to become more abstract. Even though there are more specific imageries that I'm working with, like the work with the tapestry is the most abstract I've really been. But in some ways, to me, that creates a more idea of the reality that I'm in. So yeah, I think that answered your question. I hope that.
Oh yeah, it's a great answer. Again, I welcome anyone to jump in, unmute yourself, ask questions. I admit I have not mastered that function in Zoom where I can present and see comments at the same time. So if there is a comment. Okay, great. Yes, we have. Yes, go ahead. I think you are unmuted.
Anada.
Yeah.
Anada, hi. It's not really a question, it's an observation. To Ali, I think you're, you work with spaces and photography and light and walking around. And it occurs to me that the gallery and the museum are the perfect space to show these because they're neither domestic nor outdoors. And so they bring these two things together. in a space that is, you know, it's a third space that brings up the outdoors and the indoors, but not as a direct representation. I really appreciate that. And I just understood this right now. Thank you. It looks like a great show.
Yeah, Netta had the maybe joy, hopefully, of seeing these things leave my graduate studio and eventually end up here. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you so much. I wrote that down. That is, we should copyright that. Is anyone else, again, just jump in, free to unmute yourself. I can't really see the comment section for some reason, but
I can see it, Virginia. Just
okay.
My mom says, great observation.
All right.
I'm happy to like field the chat. If anyone else puts questions there, I can read them.
All right. I have one last kind of weighty question, but let's see if there's any more comments. Anything coming through in the chat? I don't know why I haven't figured this out. I am so sorry.
No, you're good. I can see it. I think, no, there's nothing new.
Okay.
So ask your weighty question. Let's do it.
My weighty question, and it's an open-ended question, so if you don't have a hard answer, that's completely fine. There's always a question of why is it important that you're making this work now? And sometimes it's just for pleasure, and I think that's a completely valid point. But one of the things that I think is really interesting about that kind of intersection where your practices and your interests and what these works are kind of commenting on, that malleability, the precarity of memory, is kind of looking at it from a larger point of view, especially living in times where people's general memory lasts like a week. Like if something happened a week ago, it's old news. I'm really interested in how you both think about that in terms of history, in terms of social progress or regression, perhaps even, and how you, kind of how you think about the endeavor of trying to capture something true or some kind of actual lived experience. Don't jump to answering it, but kind of put that question out there.
Letting it simmer.
I can go. I don't want to think of the work of like what's important. I don't think that matters to me. I don't think it matters at all. I think it's the process. It really is the process of creation and engaging with a question, engaging with a question. And I think art, for me, when I look at art and when I look at what I'm making, if there's an engagement between the question and what's happening around, and I feel like that's enough for me to keep doing it, to keep working on it, to keep evolving with it, to keep recollecting these images. I think the times that we live in, yes, ask for more nuance. I think we need more nuance. I think we need in our worlds to find language to describe things that we cannot see, to describe temporary things, to describe things that don't often tell you this is this or this is that. It's I don't know. I think it's okay to say I don't know, and I'm looking at something that gives me the sense that I don't know, and it's a mystery, and I feel like that is beautiful, and that's part of who we are. And if that's something that I can make in a visual way, or in a storytelling way, or in sound or spatial, I'm that's all I can do right now. Yeah.
That was well said. I mean, ditto most of that, Amanda. Big agree. I think for both of us, like this, not to speak for you, but I think our work is like deeply personal, and that then when it's being displayed, it becomes more of like a proposal to the viewer to maybe bring some, sense of like heightened awareness or clarity through ambiguity, which I realize is sort of an oxymoron, but I think that's totally possible. And I mean, that is my hope when, someone sees my work, that, when they leave, that maybe having seen something that I made would like uproot some of that in themselves as well, that they would want to like move a little slower through the world and like look a little harder. And I think that that same sentiment can be translated to the times, as Amanda was mentioning. And I hope that sort of slower pace and investigative spirit can like translate beyond just visual work.
I think those are two great answers. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, if there's, as soon as we get the okay that we are in the next tier where we can allow in-person appointments. Oh, I'm seeing questions now. Oh, great. Stephen Wallace has a question for Amanda, or a comment. He writes, I love the pieces that have the old leather cut up covering the rest of the piece. Does memory place a part in these? Because I very much see them as something through time, trying to claw and scrape to get the full picture without actually being able to.
Yeah, definitely. I think the peeling and the getting through the layers of memory and cultural inheritance. I remember when I think of my past is of another person, because I was misplaced and placed in this other country with another culture, and I had to learn new manners, and I had to learn new things, and I had to learn how to say things differently. And I remember having this visual concept of like peeling through these layers that I knew to be true to get to the new layers that were building up in order to come out. I feel like memory works that way. Our emotions sort of work that way. We process things and we interpret them through the dimensionality that they have, these layers that they have. And sometimes our memories are it's so imperfect. Like we have chunks of it, and sometimes they come in full force. And sometimes they come as just a little sliver. And I think, yeah, those pieces reflect on that too. Thank you for the question. It's a good question.
Stephen also has a great question for Alexandria. How are you able to capture such mundane / often ugly structures or places and turn them into beautiful abstractions?
First of all, the seemingly mundane and ugly to be fabulous. So that's part of it. I mean, first of all, this is my husband asking me these things. So he knows, like, we oftentimes will be walking together and I'll like stop in my tracks because I have to take a picture of something, and he'll ask me like, what are you looking at? Like, there's nothing here. And so I don't know, I guess I'm constantly looking at like the edges of things and walls that have been repainted 100 times and things that I think a lot of people probably just like pass by and absorb in a way that they're not really looking at it. And I find those things so compelling. So I guess that's, I just, yeah, I guess from the beginning, I find those things much more captivating. And so then, you know, using them in the work is exciting to me. Whereas I think a lot of other, you know, per our experiences and people asking, like I'm taking a picture of, I know that not everyone like sees it that way, but yeah.
Keen eye, for sure. Well, we're just a little bit past the hour mark. So unless there's any other lingering, burning questions or comments.
Can I just say my takeaway? Because I really just so appreciate being able to hear both of you guys speak. And I don't have like a specific question because I think the work is so like contemplative, and I don't know, I don't think I've seen two, just in my recent memory, to be topical with the word, I don't think I've seen a show where two artists' work really complemented each other, and sort of like the curation made it so much stronger that I can recall. And I feel like I'll be thinking about what each of you has said and its relationship to the work for like a long time after this talk. And I think it's because of the way that each of you guys perceives the world. I think it makes me feel like I want to lay down and look up in the sky and like just think about things and see all these little small marks that become bigger marks or become bigger excavations or something in each of the work. It doesn't make me want to necessarily immediately like have a burning question, but I want you to know that it has really impacted me, and it will last for a really long time in my mind. And I feel like you guys should know that sometimes as artists, you don't always know what the impact is with other people. And yeah, this has been such a like poetic way of seeing the world. And I'm really glad that I got to hear from each of you. And yeah, I mean, it's incredible work. So thank you.
That is
Wow, thank you.
amazing.
Thanks, Haley.
But seriously,
so
for
much.
real, it's true. Like, I really feel that way. I'm so happy I was able to hear you guys.
Thank you for that. That just made our days.
Yeah.
Are there any other comments? I still can't see this comment box.
Autumn asked Ali and Amanda, what are you working on now? So that could be a good, what am I working on?
Well, Amanda, you're out in the desert.
Oh yeah, Amanda has a very cool thing she's working on. So you go first.
Well, we don't know that yet. Don't promise them something. I am in the desert. I'm in a arts residency right now near Joshua Tree. I'm working on an installation and performance that will take place on March 11th, from sunrise to sunset. If anyone is out in the desert, of course, no, I'm not asking anyone to drive over here, but if you're already in the desert, welcome to come see the performance. It's outdoors. And it's part of a series that I call Memory House, also related to memory. Memory House is a series of chapters that takes place in various remote and abandoned locations throughout my life, where I've been and where I've lived. This is number 7. It started out in a train station, went to a hotel room, went to a theater, migrated to a couple of abandoned houses in LA. And this last iteration will take place in a house that's been abandoned for 30 years in Joshua Tree. The owner of the house, the owner of the property, is sponsoring me to like take this performance inside and in the outskirts of the property. It used to be a trout farm, which is really bizarre for a desert. So it's been fun to engage with the space, but I'm also in the process of cleaning the area right now. So let's see what happens. But thank you for asking. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
When is that going to be? When is that performance?
So performance is March 11th. all day from sunrise to sunset. Sunrise in the desert is around 6 a.m. Sunset is 5:30.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You can find, sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you can find information about the residency in my Instagram, which I can plug you in, whoever wants it to find it. Yeah.
That sounds amazing, Amanda. I'm working on much less exciting things, just some small works right now, some little paintings. This show physically took over my body and apartment. So I'm enjoying a little bit of a breather and working on, you know, some little buddies that you can see behind me on just some smaller scale work that I'd been just waiting to get started on. So just more paintings, and we'll see after that. I'm not sure. I want to make some photos again after talking about photography so much. So that might be next, like some, or painting onto some photos, like getting even closer to the photographic, like I said earlier. So we'll see. I think something is in the mix with that. So I'll put my information in the chat as well. So if you want to keep in touch, you can.
Okay, and we have one last question that I think is actually a really great question. Jenny, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say Jenny, I don't want to mispronounce your last name, asks, how did you two realize you were artists? That's always kind of a big question.
I
$1 million
apparently when I was 3, I told my mom I was an artist, but I don't know. After that, it just happened. I just want to say I did not go to art school. I'm self-taught. I'm not trained in any ways. I was brought up by an artist, my grandfather and my grandmother around. He was also self-taught. So it's kind of something we just practiced. I could have become something else, then probably would have still practiced some kind of art, because that's what my family always did. They had an artistic practice alongside their day jobs. It was just an unspoken kind of thing, and I was just the first to pursue it full time.
Yeah, for me, I think it's been the only thing that can like hold my attention for this long. I mean, yeah, I've done other things, but art has always been like a thread. And my mom, who's here listening, can attest to, you know, every time we would have a career day, I would fill out a form and dress up like an artist. There was a brief ballerina phase, but I realized that wasn't going to happen. So it's just been something that I could always come back to, and has been a constant. So here I am doing it.
Well, I've just put a link in the chat to a gallery of images of the installation, of the exhibition installation. So you guys can check that out. Again, crossing our fingers that we can safely open to appointments before May 8th. The exhibition is going to run through May 8th. So as soon as that's possible, check our social media, check our websites. You can just make an appointment after that. Next week, we're going to be in conversation with Olga La, who's going to talk about her amazing installation, talk about work that you really need to experience in person. We're going to talk with Olga La about her installation titled Constellation. That's going to be next Thursday, March 11th at 2 p.m., also on Zoom. If you want the link to that, you can email Fine Arts Customer Service, and they'll send you a link to that. You can also register on yourirvine.org, or you can just message us on social media, and we will share that information with you. Thank you so much to everyone who is here today. Thank you so much, Alexandria and Amanda, for being part of this endeavor during COVID, but it happened. And I'm just really glad that I was able to work with you both. It's really been a joy. Thank you again, everyone who's here today. Hope you enjoyed learning about these two amazing artists, and I'm just super excited to see what your next moves are going to be. So, thank you
Thanks
all.
for joining us.
Thank-
It was wonderful.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Virginia.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, Amanda.